it's just leaving a little bit of room for God to be himself and to realize I do not know all of it. And I think I know that scripture, but I don't have it all. And so I should pray just as hard as I would, and I should believe with every part of me, but at the same time realizing my place and God's place are very different, and so I need to be open.
Hey, hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Power of Prayer podcast. Pop, pop, pop. That's what we say.
It's nice.
When something cool happens.
Okay.
Prayer related, we go pop.
Okay.
Actually, it's just me that does that. It hasn't caught on yet, but it will. Everyone, this is episode 4. We're really excited to be here today with Andrew Call.
Mm-hmm.
I said that right.
You did.
It's Call. Good. I'm Wanek, and I always used to get Wanek, so I'm like, I'm not going to go with Cal.
You'd be surprised how many people get it wrong.
Yeah.
It's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, but it's a lot of people mess it up, huh?
Hey, what was the saying? Pow.
Pop.
Pop.
Yeah, pop.
We've already had one.
We've already had that was our first pop.
Nice.
So I'm here with Andrew today, and he's a former pastor and current owner of Visual Trend Creative. Mm-hmm. It's an AVL company, yeah?
Yep.
Awesome. And he's the husband to Abigail and the father of Trip and Ezra. How old are they?
10 and 7.
Oh, wow. So they are pretty close together.
Yeah. A lot of fun. Busy.
A lot of fun.
Yeah.
I have a 4-month-old and a 1.5-year-old.
Wow.
So
Okay.
I can't wait till they kind of get to that stage where they can communicate a little bit more.
Yes.
Now
They can communicate.
Yeah. Now it's just pooping and crying.
It's just, yeah.
So
They're all fun stages from what I've gone through. I thought it would be different at this stage. I thought it'd be fun because they would communicate, and it absolutely is. Don't take that the wrong way. But it is getting harder, though, because it's more complex. It's not just the little things. It's serious conversation. It's questions they get from school. So I love it, but man, yeah, it's a ride.
It's a whole new
thing.
That's good. That's good. So tell me a little bit about what got you here and your journey.
I mean, when I was born, my dad was a pastor, so I was raised in a home in ministry. That has plenty to do with it. Lots of stories there. But then after college, started volunteering at a church. Didn't know what I wanted to do, and I started volunteering, doing some production, and I knew nothing. I was just, okay, I'll volunteer some time.
Sure.
And God used that to really spark an interest into how do you put together a service? How do you use lights? How do you use video, sound to really help people to maybe have an experience and to remove some obstacles? Got on staff at a church. Fast forward, I was a pastor for about 15 years.
Wow.
2 different churches.
Wow.
All sorts of roles in between.
Sure.
Of what that looked like, but spent a lot of time invested in local church, and then felt a tug probably 2-3 years ago of I love helping churches to take these steps, and I love really communicating with a lead pastor and his team and trying to translate, like, hey, this is why they're wanting to do these things. This is why it would be good for you.
Sure.
But let me also help you with why it's going to cost this much money. Let's talk about it. Let's try to remove some of the mystery about this, and let's try to put a project together. So launched a company about 2.5 years ago, and I'm doing it full time, just helping churches and schools and a couple theme parks doing some fun stuff.
Wow, that's really amazing.
Yeah, it's fun.
I like how it all started from you just kind of trying to be involved, and God was like, let's put you over here.
No,
and
he knew.
Yeah,
he knew I was just really not sure. Like a lot of people at that age, I was like, I don't know. But I started volunteering, and God used it, and really, it's been a fun journey so far.
Well, and it's also a very usable skill out in the real world. It's like, like somebody, I know a guy that was in the Marines, and all he did was build automatic bridges that jump over rivers, and he got out, and he was like, what do I do with that?
Yeah.
But
it's very practical. It helps a lot of people.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. A shout out, by the way, to any and all production team anywhere, at any campus, at any church in the world. Everyone, if you're looking for somebody on Sunday to buy a coffee for, find somebody on the production team, because yes, the pastor delivers a great message, but the production team allows you to hear it clearly and see it clearly and make it a little bit more dramatic. So their job is beyond important.
Yeah, agreed.
But today we're here and we're going to talk a little bit about prayer.
Mm-hmm.
Just about a real easy conversation about kind of your journey, how you do it, what you love about it, what you don't love about it, what just a little bit of everything. So I guess we can start off with, let's go back to the beginning.
Yep.
Do you recall your earliest memories of prayer? Like, did you learn it at home, at night, by the bed with mom and dad? Did you learn it at church? Like, when did you and how did you start praying?
I think one of the first memories about it that stands out is actually when I remember being young. My dad was a pastor. At night, we would have prayer time together, just like you'd expect.
At home.
Perfect family, no problems. I wish that was true. But I remember the night that I actually started speaking in tongues, which is great. I have that memory. But it's funny because I remember praying at night with the family. We were in the room, and people talk about, gift of the Holy Spirit, speaking in tongues. There's a lot we could get into about that. But I just remember only really having like one word I was just thinking about and saying over and over. And I was young at the time. And I remember my mom in the middle of prayer time, she's like, "You can't be making noises like you're like pretending to shoot a gun." And I was like, "Actually, I'm just trying to say this word that I'm thinking about right now." And it was actually more comical because we all just laughed about it. Sure. But I just remember that moment of prayer was a pretty consistent thing. I remember just being kind of a foundational piece, even without really knowing much about it. I remember praying in tongues as a little kid like that, and that was kind of the beginning of it. But it was just a fun, when I think back of memories about prayer, that makes me laugh all the time because I'm like, it was pure, it was honest. Yeah. There was really no bad motives, but a parent thinking like, okay, please pay attention. I'm like, actually, I'm really paying attention right now. But that was a fun time.
Well, that's kind of the dream scenario, right? Because when you're that age, everything is so great and pure.
Totally.
And so many of us like really kind of realize our prayer lives and kind of like get into it or start thinking about how we do it when we're older.
Yeah.
And by then we're so in our heads that, especially when it comes to like the gift of tongues or something like that, you're so in your head that it can be really, really hard.
Absolutely. I mean, it was a blessing. It was just it was a fun memory. But yeah, prayer was a thing that it was a part of my life, even without really knowing a whole lot at that stage. Everybody has their story, but for me, it was a part of my life, but then I had to make it my own later, and I'm continuing to figure out, like, what does prayer life for me mean? What does it look like? How consistent is it? What time, where? It's still a revolving door all the time of figuring it out, but I would say now that to jump forward, prayer for me is something that I feel like I constantly am not doing it enough, while at the same time it's very comforting and it's available, and it doesn't need to be, where I am right now, it doesn't need to be drawn out, formal, any of these things. It's really just an honest time for me to be able to express what's going on, good, bad, everything in between. It's fun that it has both of those qualities, but it's something that I'm always thinking, man, I should pray more often. I should be more spiritual. But at the same time, I think God just wants my honesty and my openness and my vulnerability. So try not to be too tough on it all the time.
Yeah. Well, speaking of time, let's get into that, some of the nitty gritties on that. So time. Do you have is there a set kind of time where you usually find yourself praying during the day, and when is that?
I wish there was a set time. Mm-hmm. There's really no set time. Mm-hmm. I constantly am thinking, okay, I'm gonna do this from 5 to 5:30, and I don't. Yeah. It just goes out the window, and then I could feel bad about it, but really what it's turned into for me, beyond praying for a meal or praying with our kids before bed, it really is if I'm in the car and I'm driving, it's usually a time for me to either make phone calls that I need to make because I'm going somewhere, or just to be in prayer. Also, my job has a good amount of travel. So if I'm away and I am away from the family a little bit, it gives me a separation and a space to really be reflective. And so I've just found that trips for me are a great time in my life and in my schedule to say, I'm just going to spend some time. I'm in the car for 45 minutes driving from the airport. I'm going to pray a little bit. I'm going to just have by myself. I'm going to use this time to really just be intentional. So it's not a set time, and it really is just when I throughout the day, probably 4 or 5 times, when can I put in a little bit of intentionality?
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's wonderful, and I think that's important for people to hear, is that you don't have to have that set time. And I think for people that are new to prayer, it might be a little bit easier to do it at times like that. When it is, you know what, if you're in the car, that might be a little bit less intimidating than like going and setting up
Yeah.
your home altar or whatever you have going on, right? So yeah, there's no wrong spot to pray, and that's great. That's some time where you're literally by yourself. You would just, if you weren't praying, you'd just be in your head anyways,
Yep.
worrying about something. You might as well use it talking to God and putting that energy into faith.
Yeah. I mean, it's practical, which I think can almost sound negative at times, but I don't think it is at all.
No.
I mean, it really is. When you feel like God's bringing something up, and the more that you experience faith, the more I think you realize and you're sensitive to that. Like, oh, that's coming to mind. Not just because it's coming to mind, it's because God's like, hey, maybe we should be thinking about that. Maybe you should be thinking about that conversation or that interaction or whatever it needs to be. So I've just found that if I'm physically having some distance and I have a moment and it's just me, it's a great time. Yeah, for me.
Do you ever have times during the day? Do you feel when you haven't prayed in a while? Do you feel you like, and even to like change that? Are there times when you feel like you're not far away from God, but like you need to pray? And like, what is that feeling? Because people like, is that anxiety? What is that like?
Good question. The first thing that comes to mind is I think anytime I'm really feeling guilty about it, I would say that's probably the enemy trying to mess with me, because it's not. I don't think God would use that tactic. Now, his ways are higher. He gets it. But I don't feel like using fear as a motivation or a guilt as a motivation is probably what I need to be responding to all the time.
That's good.
So I think that's an easy trap, and I fall into it all the time. But I think it's similar to a relationship with my wife. If we haven't connected in a while, whether that's conversation, intimacy, anything, if there's been space and just because of life, I think you can naturally feel a little distant.
Yeah.
And I can feel a little bit like, hey, we need to go on a date. We need to get together. We need to hang out. We need to talk. Yes, we have 2 kids. We're really busy, but we're also going to be dating forever. So let's spend some time together. So I think I can be reminded of it. And I think I can catch myself if there has been too long of a time of, I haven't really been vulnerable for a while. God, I haven't really talked about the things that are really on my mind with you.
Yeah.
Even if it's just for 2 minutes. God, this is where I am, and I'm walking into this, and that running dialogue. And I'm just not one that's really big on formula, and it needs to look a certain way. I really just want it to be honest. And so, I think I don't really I do feel guilt, yes, but I try to not respond to that. I think I feel the distance just in a longing of like, man, I haven't really had that conversation for a while, so we should probably do that.
Yeah, that's very well put. And it's a truth too that I feel like the enemy uses guilt.
Absolutely.
Because it's like just like a go-to for the dude, like I see that I teach I'm in the recovery program, and I'm one of the teachers in there, and that's one of the biggest things that stops people from coming and asking for help, that stops them that starts them back up drinking or using. It's just guilt, right? And because when the more guilt you have, the less you forget about what a huge word grace is.
Absolutely.
Like I think we don't realize how big grace is.
Yep.
Right? And guilt, it's just a little, all it takes is a little bit of that guilt to just really stop you from picking up the phone, stop you from praying, stop you from anything, from working out to doing your taxes, right? Like,
as long as it can be a reminder, and it's like hey, I feel guilty, so I should go do that. I don't see it as a negative as if it can bump me back into what I should be doing. But when it comes with the negativity and the shame,
the weight
of it, I think that's the part that is really just not from God. It's a waste of time. It doesn't it's the enemy trying to eat up and get into my life. And
that's also a good time to maybe pray, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I like what you're saying, to where you'll do it. You said 3, 4, 5 times a day, just like popping in and praying. That's a good thing for people to know too, because it's not like God's like, all right, this is my one time to listen to you.
Yeah.
All right, better get it all out, because then I'm on to the next dude. It's not like that. Like he's like, someone told me once, a pastor told me that, like, God doesn't have eyelids. So he's never stopped watching you. He's never taken his eye off you. He's always there waiting.
Yep.
And I like, even though that's kind of weird that God doesn't have eyelids, I'm like, I kind of dig that.
Yeah.
Like, that's kind of dope. He's always got his eye on me. So that's good for people to know that you can just, hey, oh crap, I've prayed like 4 times today, but I still need this. Pray. Like, pray. Just do it. Don't hold back. God's not going to get bored or overwhelmed or overworked.
Right.
just go into it. So that's really good.
Yeah.
And you talked a little bit about, you're not formulaic too, and like that always takes me back to, so I was raised Catholic, right? So
Totally.
it was at night at the bedside, mom sitting here, now I lay me down, like that whole thing. I find that I still have a little bit of that, but it's my own thing, right? Like I start off, and it doesn't bother me because like I start off and there's a picture of my family right here on the wall, and I'll look at each one of them, and I'll be like, thank you for baby Gabriel. Let no harm come to him, either physical or demonic. And then boom, 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 boom. Then thank you. So there's a little bit of pattern there, but I'm okay with that, right? Do you find any of that it's kind of an ism that you do, or a little bit of a?
I think it, like anything else in my life, it comes and goes in seasons.
Sure.
And so when I hear of a leader or a pastor, artist, anyone that maybe they're more intentional and they're taking, it's going to be this time, it's on my calendar. I don't think that's bad. It just doesn't work for me all the time.
Right.
But I think for them, if that works for them and that's when they know they're going to have that consistent relationship, then I'm all for it. And I've gone through seasons of, I want to make sure I start off my prayer time with gratitude. And I want to make sure I'm giving thanks for all the things and just reminding myself of what God's done. Again, not bad, but that's a way to start. Or I just try to approach it as I just want to be well-rounded. I want to be able to be praying for my family. And I think what you're talking about is good. I also just don't want to get into a place where I feel like I'm saying the same thing the same way every time.
Yeah.
Which, if that's how you pray, not bad. I think God's going to hear you. That's honest. I just know for me, I want to also be engaged mentally a little bit and thinking about, for example, like when I put my kids to bed, my wife was commenting, and it wasn't bad, but she was laughing. She's like, hey, you always are praying, but it's pretty similar. Like when you're going to pray for them, I don't want them to have any bad dreams. God, I want you to protect them tonight. Which are all good things.
Yeah.
But she was commenting on like, hey, sometimes it feels like you're just going through those motions because it's what you're supposed to do, which great reminder. Ouch, but great reminder.
Yeah.
So even in my prayer time, sometimes I structure. Sometimes it's I want to be gratitude. I want to have gratitude. I want to do these things. And sometimes it's really just honest. God, I have this window, and I'm going to tell you what I'm feeling.
Yeah.
Good, bad, all of those things. So I would say for me, it's really not broken down into categories a lot of time. I would like to try to hit them all. But yeah, that right now in my life, that's not what's a part of it.
Well, it's interesting because, what you said, your wife saying that to you, I can see her hearing that, but what you said also makes sense. Is like, you were also saying them because they're like fully functional things that you want to happen. Right. It's like, if I forget, the same thing when I put the baby to bed, I'll say the same thing when I put her to carry to bed. Let no harm come to her, either physical or demonic. And then I'm always like, let her have a beautiful sleep, blah, blah, blah. And if I walk away and I forgot to say one of those things, I'll go and say it.
Right.
And I wouldn't do that if it was formulaic. It was like, this really is something I want to.
If it's impactful, and because everyone's going to be a little bit different. And you talked about being raised with Catholicism like that. It doesn't mean it's bad if there's certain phrases or things. I think for me, at least, even putting on my pastor hat, it's about the relationship. And if that relationship for you in this season it's easier for me if I can just know I'm going to pray for these 5 things, then pray for those 5 things. Yeah. Great job.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like any relationship. It's going to grow. It's going to change.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid of that. But I would much rather people pray in any way they could than self-select out because of fear, because of doubt, because of anxiety over, am I doing it right? It sounds silly, but there's no wrong way.
Yeah.
I think to pray.
Yeah. Pop, that was a good pop. What we always say is like, there's no wrong way to pray. The only wrong way to do it is just
absolutely
not do it. Yeah. Right? Like that's the only wrong way is if you're not doing it. And that's the nice thing is like the point of entry is just you opening up your mouth and being super honest, right? With God. And that's all you got to do.
I mean, it sounds silly, but maybe someone can relate to it. For me, if I can pray about it, it almost, in that space of prayer time, it actually gives me a comfort to know that it's just me and him.
Yeah.
And I can be really vulnerable and honest.
Yeah.
When in almost every other relationship, for any number of reasons, it can be hard to be vulnerable and honest. I mean, I love my wife, but I catch myself all the time thinking later, why did I not feel comfortable maybe saying that part? Or maybe did we not discuss this in that way? And we can circle back to it. That's fine. But prayer time can actually just be a comfort of I can say anything, like talking to a therapist, although it's better.
Yeah.
I believe in therapy, but this is another way to get some help. It's weird, but once you step into it and you trust it, you can open up about anything that's going on. It doesn't need to always be, God, you're just great. Man, thank you for it. Of course, thank you. But yeah, I'm not sure how you feel about language, but if I'm having a really bad day, I'm just going to pray about it.
Yeah.
God, today is blank.
Yeah.
And it feels very blank all the time. And I'm just going to be open. And and I feel like that is exactly what he would want from me.
I think so. I think you're 100% right. Like my wife, like if you hear her praying, you think that she's like talking to like one of her, like she's Hispanic, but like
Mine
you
too.
think she'd be like talking to like angrily to one of her Hispanic friends. And I'm like, who's she talking to in there? Because I'm hearing like, yo, bro. And I'm like, what is happening? It's like, oh, she's praying. I'm going to let her do that, you know?
Yeah.
But like, that's her language, Tim, right? That's how she's the most honest. So I think everything you're saying is just right. Like, if your day's jacked up, like, God's days, it's effed up. God, help me out a little
Absolutely.
bit, you know?
I mean, I know that there's going to be, again, well-rounded for me is something that I'm always striving for. So it can't just be, God, I'm really pissed off this is happening, or this business is not doing well.
Yeah.
And it can't, for me, only be, God, life is perfect. I'm so thankful. Or I'm at church. I'm going to be praying. I mean, for me, it's more about just making it a consistent thing, not a formulaic or situational thing. I think I'm never going to arrive there, but that's what I'm striving to try to do.
Yeah.
It's just be more honest, more open all the time.
Well, and that's the nice thing about it is, you know, like a pastor said once, like everybody's cookie is made a little bit different, right? And so like your prayer life is the same. And which is cool about this show is because I'll hear things on here that I'll try out during prayer, and I'll be like, oh, that's awesome. Like, and I'll use it, right? But there's other things that I'll try out and be like, I just can't. Figured like there was a gentleman we had on, and he would preface everything he prayed for as if it already happened. And I was like, well, I can get on board with that. And I tried doing it.
Yeah.
And I couldn't figure it out. Like, maybe I don't know the language good enough of English, but like I couldn't. Yeah. I found myself trying to figure out how to say stuff, and all of a sudden I was not even connected with God. I'm like, okay, let's just go back. Okay, God, help me.
Totally. Right. I mean, I hear different thing. I mean, whether it's church or in a book or with friends, and I think that you have to remove some of that, again, guilt or shame of, am I doing this right? That's a common place to get stuck, I think. Even for me, is like, God, am I doing this right? And if I really remember that his grace is sufficient for me, his power is made perfect in weakness, I've got plenty of weakness, so it's going to be perfect through him. I can just try to remind myself to let go of some of those guardrails, and just praying can be as simple as you need it to be. Yeah. It doesn't need to be drawn out. And again, I don't feel bad if it has to be a drive-by thing. I have 30 seconds. I'm going to pray real quick about this. Okay, great. Yeah. That's 30 seconds better than not spending 30 seconds of prayer. So, removing the guilt and shame, big one. And
the comfort that you talked about, the comfort's there too, because sometimes just hearing yourself say something out loud is so different than keeping it inside, that the comfort just comes from that. You know, it's just like when you hear yourself say it, you can almost hear it with a whole new lens. Like so I'm a creative director and writer by trade, right? So in advertising, whenever I'm teaching my writers, I'm always like, whenever you write, no matter if it's a jingle or a radio commercial, whatever, before you turn it in, read it out loud to yourself, because it's going to sound different. Oh yeah. Right. And I think there's like, of course, God is there he's always waiting to help you and always waiting to listen to you and comfort you. But there's also like a self-comfort, I think, that comes from just hearing yourself say it, because it can just be like, oh man, I just got that off my chest. Yeah. Like, oh.
No, I agree. I mean, I mentioned therapy, but I mean, I'm a big believer in therapy.
100%.
Wife and I, we do it together. We do it separately. And it took me a minute to get comfortable with the idea of, this person is here to help me, but I can open up any part of life that I want to. And they're going to be content. They're going to hold that space with me. They're not going to immediately try to just jump in and change or dictate. And once I got comfortable in that rhythm, it was a freedom. And it's the same thing, I think, with prayer, like you're talking about. If you can hear yourself say it, sometimes that can be the starting point you need, I believe, to actually putting things into practice in life, or to having that conversation with the other person is, I've actually done some of this by just praying about it, and it's taken away a little bit of fear, a little bit of the anxiety for me. But I also feel like it's almost it's not a test run, that'd be the wrong term, but I've already been open and honest about it with God. So being open with the other person is somehow a little bit easier.
Yeah.
If I'm doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. That's a good way to put it. Yeah. Perfect. So let's talk about now. So when people pray, sometimes you'll hear pastors, especially like if you're in church and they'll say, the Lord spoke to me and said, God told me. That can mean so many different things. Or for those that just don't have any idea what it means, like, what does that mean? Like, because I get that question a lot. It's like, well, he said he heard from God. So like, did he hear it? Did he see it in his mashed potatoes? Like, what's he mean?
Right. I mean, good question. Probably a lot of ways you can answer it. And I grew up in the Assemblies of God, a denomination, loved it. But like any denomination, it has things that are difficult, things that can feel weird, uncomfortable. And so when you ask that question, it just probably reminds me of those times in life where I think if someone says they heard from God, I can't say if they did or not.
Sure.
I don't know. But I think I'm probably in a place in my life where I'm more probably reserved or hesitant to just make that bold claim of like, no, I heard from God. This is because I think that spiritual manipulation is real and people do it all the time. And so that's not to say a pastor is wrong. I'm not going down that road, although I think it has been used in ways that can hurt people and harm people at times. And so the question of when someone says that, I mean, is what they're saying lining up with Scripture? That's going to take some time to figure out, to go and read the Bible a little bit or investigate. I think if it's personal opinion, not tied to any church or pastor, I'm a big believer in having a conversation with that group of people about, hey, I really felt like God was speaking to me about this. Why don't we get together and let's talk about it? Not bold, hey, there's 1,000 people in the room. God told me this. You can't disagree.
Yeah.
You can't, right.
Yeah, so question. So like when you feel like God is like having an influence on your heart or speaking to you or, or guiding you in some way, can you describe what that feels like? So if someone's new to prayer and they're like, is this just like my gut or is this what it means when people say God?
Yeah, good. Okay. Great. Thanks for the framing because it feels like for me, if I'm saying I feel like God's speaking to me, I think that's very personal for everybody. For me, it's usually about it's been coming to mind consistently. It's been, for example, if it's a conversation I had with my son and I think it didn't go well, if I find myself dwelling on it or it's just coming to the surface over and over, maybe a few hours, few days, few weeks, I feel like that's God just constantly reminding me like, hey, I think you should be praying about this. I think you should be thinking about this. So for me, probably because I'm just not very smart, it needs to be repetitive. And it needs to be like, man, that's really been coming to my mind more often.
Yeah. And
just having an awareness that might be God speaking to me, not just that I'm thinking about it over and over. So for one, that's true. But also I think that God uses anything to speak to you. Now, disclaimer, that can be taken a bunch of different ways. And I'm not trying to excuse anything that would be weird. But the other day, I actually had been feeling in my spirit, like I don't think I'm doing devotional and prayer time maybe enough or right. And I was just thinking about it for a few weeks. It came up in a sermon at church, and I was like, well, he's talking to me today. Here we go. This is great. And my wife had bought this devotional book that she was going through and giving it to a few people. And she gave me one, and I put it on my nightstand, and I hadn't opened it, and it had been a week or two. And she said, hey, why don't you do the devotional with the boys? You're in town tonight. So I went and got it, went to the day that they were supposed to be at, and it was all about prayer and having devotional with God.
Wow.
And really, it's a short devotional, but it was really taking away pressure and guilt and shame. And I remember in that moment being like, this has to be from God because I've been thinking about it internally, not really sharing it. My wife buys this book on Amazon. It's been on my nightstand for a week. And it just happens that I open it up to talk to my boys, and this is the devotional. This is the thing. And it was more just confirmation of like, okay, God, you are speaking to me.
Yeah.
Even though it's a small, this isn't a loud voice and the whole world stops. It was a very real, like, oh, you heard that, and you've been trying to nudge me into doing this more often, or
Yeah.
into maybe reimagining what my quiet time with you is gonna be. So, yeah, consistency for me is great, but also God sometimes just has to hit me over the head and be like, no, I'm here, and
Yeah.
this is what I'm talking about.
You know what I find so interesting is that that's a common reoccurrence,
Yep.
what you just said.
Yep.
Because I still do that. I tell people, I'm like, yeah, like I must be thick-headed because God, like,
Yeah.
literally has to slap me in the face.
Yeah.
But so many of us say that.
Yeah.
I wonder if that's just our human nature.
I think stubbornness, human nature, all of it. But I also think it's the patience and the grace of God
Yeah.
to just keep trickling that in a little bit. And then every once in a while, it's no, I can't avoid that you really spoke to me in that moment.
Mhm.
And it was very profound for me because of the way that those things lined up. And that doesn't always happen. It's not always this crazy story that you could turn into a show or a movie. Sometimes it's just that, for me, that gentle reminder of, man, I'm quiet, I'm to myself right now, and what's coming to the surface?
Mhm.
What am I thinking about? And letting that kind of lead me into what I'm going to be praying about is happening right now.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
I love it. That's beautiful. Okay, great. So, all right. So let's talk about when things get rocky, right? Like, how do you respond? How do you find yourself responding if you've been praying for something and it's like either taking forever, or let's go even farther, like it just blatantly didn't happen?
Yep.
How have you found yourself responding to that? Whether it's just now, or has that evolved? Or did you used to get really upset and you've realized?
Yeah, it's evolving, I think, all the time. There's a number of stories that jump to mind. I would say when I was younger, I think frustration and anger would come faster. It was, God, why haven't you responded?
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe you haven't responded the exact way I wanted you to respond. And I think it was more on me just being more immature and letting those things be what I would gravitate to faster
Mm-hmm.
if I wasn't getting the result that I was thinking I should get. I'm definitely old. I feel old in the morning when I get up. I'm not old yet, but looking back, I can see that there's been times that God was still in every situation. I just wasn't able to acknowledge it, and I wasn't able to see it. And there's also times where I'm just not going to have an answer probably ever. I mean, I had a sister, she passed away at 30 from cancer, and it was a terrible thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I still wrestle with a lot of the outcome, with did I have enough faith? Why wasn't she healed? Like, there is still so much that's wrapped up in that will probably never be fully understood until I get to heaven. So I don't want to just dismiss and say, well, God's ways are higher, so I'm just going to give up. But also being in a place of like, okay, but it's about a constant pursuit of relationship that I think I'm going to continue to learn more. It's not in that specific part of my story. It's not going to be I'm going to get a quick answer and a decision and no, it's all going to work out the way that you thought it would. It was very traumatic, hard, disappointing. There's anger. If anything, I think some of those moments have proved to me that God's okay with me coming with every emotion. And as a guy, not easy to get to my emotions, but I can come now and feel like, no, I'm actually very confused. And I'm going to pray for a little bit because I'm confused.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to walk away probably with like the 3 or 4 solutions.
Yeah.
But somehow in the journey and the prayer about confusion, I can find a little bit of peace, or I can find a little bit of comfort. It's not fixed. It's not gone. But yeah, it's a good question.
But yeah, I love how you said you can find a little bit of comfort in there, because there's always, that space is always there, right? And that's what prayer is for. It's like, it's also for those times where there's just no way out, right?
Yep.
There's no way out, and there's that, and you're seeking that comfort, right? And your responses, I think, do evolve. I had a really bad response to a prayer that wasn't answered once. Like, I have a 12-year-old daughter, right? And her mama married a Marine, and they got transferred to Japan. And before the orders came out, I prayed and prayed and prayed, and I was really involved in my church. Prayed and prayed and prayed for those orders to be like, stay in San Diego, when it was Japan. And I got so angry that I left the church, and they were gone for 3 years in Okinawa. I left the church. I developed my alcoholism turned into an alcoholism problem. Like I became a full blown alcoholic. It took me almost the whole 3 years to get it under control.
Yeah.
And got miraculously saved, but there's still a lot of work involved, right? And I realized it took about 3 years, and then they moved back. And I realized one day when I was talking to my daughter, and she was telling me about a show she watched, and she's like, "Daddy, we were watching the show, and there was a guy on there, and he was an alcoholic. Do you know what an alcoholic is, Daddy?" Mm-hmm. She explained it to me, and I realized, holy crap, dude. God didn't take her away from me.
Yeah.
He knew that I was going to go through this, regardless. Mm-hmm. He put her on a tropical island for 3 years and let her be just oblivious and enjoy her life while I went through this, right, and through that valley. And I didn't realize that till the whole journey was over, and I was like, that is the most, all the pain, the whole 3 years, all the hospital stays, all the rehabs, all that went away instantly, and it just turned into something beautiful.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, God is so beautiful how he designed that. Like, I could have never even thought of that plan.
Yeah.
You know?
And to me, what it reminds me of, and you covered it, I covered it, it speaks to just a little bit of maturity and a little bit of practicing faith and really being okay with, I don't know how God's going to respond in every situation. And that's frustrating, sure, but I'm not God. So I think if anything, it's probably led me to where I am now in life, is I will pray and I will believe, and I'll pray for healing, and I'll pray for all the things in life that we're going through. But I think I'm less inclined to get to a place where I'm like, God, there's only one outcome. I know what it is, and you have to do it. Because that's scary.
Yeah.
Because it might not. I mean, it even though I can be as bold and all those things, but I don't want to get myself to a place where I'm so aggressive at the one outcome that there's no room for God to do anything else.
Yeah.
Because
there's no room for him to show off, right?
He sees it in so many other different ways. And so it doesn't take away the boldness, I think, that I'm going to pray with, but it probably takes away some of the public display of boldness of like, no, I'm proclaiming it. God's going to do this.
Yeah.
Because none of us know if he actually is going to do that.
Yeah.
And if you say you know he's going to do that, it's a lie.
Yeah. Yeah. And what you said about maturity, too, about what you learn from experiences like that, on the flip side of all that and the growing and what I've learned from that. So they've been in North Carolina, and they just came up for deployment again. And there were 3 options, and they were all in the States. And we found out like 3 weeks ago that it was Japan again.
Yeah.
Same scenario. But what my wife and I did was we did not freak out. We immediately said, okay, we don't get this, so it's got to be a God thing.
Yep.
We're sad, but put it over here. Yep. And I'm not kidding you. 3 days later, my daughter called. And, 3 days later, my daughter called, and she was like, Daddy, I don't know what happened, but they changed the orders.
Yeah.
And they're coming here.
Yeah.
And, like, that was God showing off.
That's awesome.
Isn't that awesome, dude? Like, we decided not to freak out, and we just did what you said.
Right.
Let God do his work.
Yeah. It doesn't mean I don't experience the full range of emotions when I don't get the answer, though, that I wanted. It doesn't mean I don't experience the grief, the anger, the joy, all the things. And it doesn't take away, I think, me spending just as much time in prayer really advocating. And I do think that we have free will, and I should be praying for all the things and for people and for all the situations. It's just leaving a little bit of room for God to be himself and to realize I do not know all of it. And I think I know that scripture, but I don't have it all. And so not perfectly. I just think I'm at a place now where I'm realizing I should pray just as hard as I would, and I should believe with every part of me, but at the same time realizing my place and God's place are very different, and so I need to be open.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I need to be open. I like that. I like that, Andrew.
Thanks.
Okay, let's talk about my final question, which is my favorite. This has been great, by the way.
Cool. I'm having fun.
Yeah, this is nice because every little thing that people hear, it's going to help. And somebody
hope.
somewhere.
Yeah.
Right? So, and we're just talking about how we do it.
Yeah.
You know, it's like,
Yeah.
like if we were just sitting around talking about how to shoot a free throw, it might seem weird, mundane to us, but for a little kid that wants to learn how to shoot a free throw, you know. So here's the final question. Prayer helps me blank.
I think the biggest thing, at least what feels like the most right for me right now, is prayer helps me be vulnerable.
Beautiful.
Because that can be hard for so many reasons.
Especially as guys.
Just as guys in life, in any situation. And I think authenticity and vulnerability are what everybody really want, whether that's in a church or a friendship group or a relationship. But it's the hardest. And right now, for me, that means I can be authentic.
Yeah.
And just prayer gives me that space to not be put together, to not have the answers, to just, God, this really sucks.
Yeah.
And I need you.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's because authenticity gives you authority.
Yeah.
Right? It really, really does. And what you said is beautiful because as as the leader of a household, as a husband, as a father, especially as a father, your shell's got to be pretty hard, right? You spend so much of your time being strong that you need that place to be vulnerable, right? And God is your guy for that, you know, and it's
totally.
And it's you need that just as much as you need all the hard parts.
Right. It's a very helpful thing that I still constantly struggle with being vulnerable. Mm-hmm. I think I'm always going to be in a tug of war with every relationship, but also with God. Like, am I really? You talked about God seeing everything. Like, He sees everything. So I shouldn't feel hesitant, but I still find myself being hesitant about being honest.
It's like something in there that just makes it.
And I'm like, oh, but if I don't say it out loud, He's not. No, He knows. But But the act of just choosing vulnerability can be pretty freeing sometimes.
Yeah. We always say we take everything back to basketball analogies here, but it's kind of like the difference between it's a lot easier to just shoot the free throw yourself than just throw the behind the back alley-oop. But like that's what we do with faith and with prayer. It's like we're just going, all right. But it's hard to do that when your life's on the line, right?
Yeah.
But that's why it's that tug of war, and that's why I think the more that you pray, the more that you can get comfortable with that, getting through that last little veil of strings that are pulling you back from being vulnerable.
Yeah, because they're always going to exist.
Yeah.
There's always a lot of reasons why I should not pray right now in my mind and situational. Like, I'll do that. But, I think just taking away some of that pressure, man, it's helped me to just try to be more open in short little bursts.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Andrew, this has been fantastic.
Thank you.
Thanks
for letting me be here.
Yeah, it's wonderful, and we'd love to have you come back again.
Sure.
As we keep on diving and learning, I'm always going to be interested to see what it's like see how prayer life evolves, because it changes. You know, like with seasons, you know, your prayers may change how you do it. This has been great. Thank you so much. I want to thank everybody for listening. I want to thank Visualize LED Studios, now Studios. That's an awesome studio that we're in right now shooting this podcast. We got this great giant video board behind us that I didn't even use today other than our logos, because we've got what it takes just between us to keep everybody fully entertained, because we've got God with us. So I want to thank everybody for joining the Power of Prayer podcast, and we'll talk to you again. Have a good day.